Ça y est,
Here it is, the advertising break is over. Thank you to the four of you for being here for one of the last panel discussions, and we're going to talk about the various possibilities for ship salvage. The various options that's at the crossroads of technical, legal, and insurance matters. Salvage, assistance, towing, responsibility, insurance claim, indemnification. That involves a whole series of players with key roles, and we'll look at that from four complementary angles. Stephanie Schweitzer, thank you for being with us. You're a partner at HFW. You're a lawyer specializing in maritime law. Wilco Alberda, your commercial and claims manager at Smith Salvage, which is the major operator for maritime interventions, organizing salvage operations and the all associated logistics. Laurence Billard, senior marine hull claims handler for Alliance Commerciale, in charge of the management of ship claims. You'll talk more about claims management and also insurance matters. And Alexandre Rocher is hull manager and P&I at Essotier Verlingue, a maritime insurer. And for your information, well, hull is the cover of the material damage incurred by the ship itself. I hope I didn't get it wrong. Yes, that's a good omen for this roundtable. Stephanie Schweitzer, to define things correctly, could you explain what salvage and assistance are? Well, indeed, that can be interesting to quote definitions. Maritime salvage is rescue provided to a ship or its cargo. So all the goods that can be on board. The term salvage, although it's been used during the panel, in the title of the panel discussion, we use it more for rescue of people. But the central element to qualify an assistance operation is the existence of peril, a danger for the ship, and so it needs rescue. That distinguishes it from towing operations that can happen, for instance, when a ship has lost thrust, but you need to intervene, but this is a legally different operation. Rescue of souls is mandatory, it's not paid for unless the rescuers also contribute to salvage. However, assistance, maritime salvage of cargo and hull, this is optional, and however it requires the mobilization of human and technical resources. You were talking about technology that can be fairly considerable, and it requires a high level of expertise and financial means to be committed to rescue and salvage a ship in peril. Therefore, for over a century, we have expected to provide incentivizing remuneration. If you don't provide enough financial incentives, this will be difficult to bring in some participants. And that's how the institution is fairly specific. I would say, like most maritime institutions, it is mostly well regulated legally because we've got an international convention that was ratified by a large number of states, including France, from 1989, that uniformizes the various rules, the definition of the legal regime that we'll look at later. And there can be small distinctions between a local applicable law, not everything that's not decided by the convention, but everything that is interpreted. One example, and there are a few, but on the law in the UK, in UK law, the voluntary aspect of salvage is essential, and so if the government requires the services of a ship to salvage another, it is possible that it won't be called maritime assistant. In that case, remuneration will be paid in different ways, whereas in France, if the government requires assistance, it will be called assistance, and so this will be the regime that I'm going to discuss in a minute. The main principle in this convention is on remuneration. There is the definition is that there is no cure, no pay. I can see that that your interest is piqued. Why no cure, no pay? Well, this means that when there's no result, there's no remuneration. But if there is a result, a remuneration is based on the results obtained, on the value salvaged, and therefore remuneration will depend on the success of the operation. We were talking about the need to incentivize and to motivate players. Well, there are some criteria that are set by the convention, like the value of the goods salvaged, the need to protect the environment, we'll talk about that, the perils incurred, and also the time and resources mobilized. Also, maybe one last thing, you can distinguish between occasional salvage from professional salvage. You can carry out salvage if it's not your job. If a ship meets another ship in difficulty, it can bring assistance if it has the resources. And according to the 1989 convention, it will be entitled to remuneration. There's also professional salvage that is operated by highly technical, specialized ships that are equipped to intervene quickly and effectively. Smith is one of the perfect examples of that. Wilco, could you explain to us what are the operational realities in the field?
It's amazing. Yes, I can. I think there are mainly 4 types of salvage cases we come across. Drifters, so that means main engine failures, breakdowns, fire cases, collisions, and groundings. I think, those are the most prevalent cases we're dealing with. So we have 4 main warehouses all over the world, and we mobilize all our craft, equipment, personnel from those 4 warehouses to respond to the salvage, to the casualties. Sorry.
Est-ce que vous avez quelques chiffres?
Have you got any figures to give us?
Numbers is a bit difficult because it fluctuates much. You can say there are some trends. So, for example, this year we've seen a couple of collisions, which are historically quite rare. I think if you look at the whole history time frame, 30, 40 years, I think groundings were the most common type of casualties. But we now recently, for the last couple of years, seen a lot of fire cases. And not only container fire cases, but also car carriers, a lot of fire cases, and very, very difficult to deal with. Because you can't just board a vessel like that and start extinguishing a fire, because that's just human lives at stake.
Thank you for these clarifications. Stephanie Schweitzer, once again for you, could you tell us more about the various contracts and options that exist on the market? Well, salvage and assistance operations are often carried out in emergency because there's a clear and present danger. It's not necessary to have a contract. Remuneration will be due as soon as the 1989 convention applies. And professional salvage companies wanted, and they requested, it's been around for a long time, for there to be a contract to regulate their intervention. It's quite normal. Then you can get around the table to define the operation. There's a contract, and there are standard contracts that were determined, and the most widely used probably is the Lloyd's Open Form, LOF, or LOF if you want, which is a contract based on exactly the no cure, no pay principle, which is the founding principle of salvage, but with remuneration which is set in retrospect after the operation's been carried out. And in general, it provides for arbitration in London. The advantage is that it's fairly simple. It's 2 pages long. You've got boxes to tick. The arbitration clause, well, of course, it's 10 boxes long, but anyway, it's a fairly simple contract, and it can be concluded before the operation, and then each party knows what framework it operates in. Coming back to France, there is the Villeneuve type contract, which is sort of the same type of contract, still based on no cure, no pay. Maybe the big difference with this contract is that it provides for the application of French law and the competency of French arbitrators. You might ask me why there's a difference, because the criteria for the determination of remuneration are the same. They are set by the convention, as I said earlier, but we might come back to that later. Since remuneration traditionally, and I don't think anyone will prove me wrong, remuneration is much higher, quite a bit higher in the UK than in France. And so this is an issue, the choice of this forum, whereas traditionally people will tend to select UK competency. And also the difficulty is that in both cases, salvage remuneration cannot be predicted ex ante. Well, you can sort of have a rough idea, and insurers like predictable things, and I think they will explain it. They wanted to have contracts with fixed remunerations, fixed ex ante, like daily rates. Thank you so much for the clarification. Laurence Biard, moving on to you. Could you give any examples, concrete examples of the way whole insurers deal with these cases? Yes, I can give you more examples than I would want. I wanted to start by saying that the contract that will be used depends a lot on circumstances, and so you're not necessarily going to say no to an LOF or hold against a policy or holder that they signed an LOF, because it all depends on the circumstances. I want to start with examples. We haven't had to sign an LOF, whereas there was really a clear and present danger. The first case that comes to mind is an oil tanker that had lost thrust off the coast in the ocean, and unfortunately it was on the path of a hurricane. Unfortunately. So luckily, thanks to a policy holder that was very responsive, a broker that was just as responsive, collaboration between the three of us happened immediately, and we could sign a bin up to hire rather than an LOF, so we could have a daily rate. We knew how much we would pay roughly, rather than an LOF where we didn't really know where we would land eventually. And so that was all thanks to the policy holder that worked a lot with us. Our experience as an insurer, because we had other such situations, and we provided non-negligible technical support with our own internal engineers, very often former sailors, Allianz Consulting, and so they bring their technical expertise, and they'll say whether the tugboat that was selected is the right one in terms of power, for instance, if the price of oil that we're offered is the right one, if the time to get there won't mean that the ship's going to sink before the tug gets there. So these are so many things that we negotiate, that we're going to analyze, and then the policyholder chooses, but usually we gave our preliminary green light about the fact that this was a good contract and that the daily rates were acceptable. And let me interrupt. How quickly does it take? That can happen in just a few hours. But you have to be super responsive, right? Yes, I had a case where the ship was taking water off New Zealand, where there aren't a lot of people to handle that, and we had to manage towing. Back then, I was still in Singapore, and I was managing that with somebody in France, and we were working 24 hours a day with the policyholder, and I don't think they were sleeping either. So, yes, that can exist, but you need very close cooperation with the policyholder and the brokers. Usually we have tripartite meetings, even with the adjusters and experts, to be able to move quickly. What we said is that we'll never reject an LOF if it's justified by the circumstances. A boarding with two ships that collide, that don't come free of each other, with life on board, we won't hold it against them that they signed an LOF to save the ship as quickly as possible, especially if there might be severe pollution. So there we absolutely understand that an LOF can be justified for emergency interventions with all necessary means to save the souls and the bodies, the ships. But then collaboration. Well, if you're told at the very beginning, you can manage the situation with as few surprises as possible. Why would you be told from the beginning? That seems a bit absurd. It's like a car accident. You tell your insurance immediately. Well, sometimes we learn from the media before we do from the brokers. That can happen, that there's such a long chain of reporting. So the policyholder, they will only tell the insurers a few days after the event, and we're faced with a done deal. And it's more difficult for us to anticipate the reserves in our case, how much it's going to cost, and it's very difficult to help the policyholder immediately because we don't know about it. Whereas that's what we're here for. Our aim is to help the policyholder save their ship in the best circumstances. Alexandre Rocher, any examples? We see the need to be very responsive. Have you got any examples? To add to what Laurence was saying, she's right from the beginning. You're starting from a blank page. There's an event, but with little information about it. So the idea is that a communications loop is established between policyholder, broker, and insurer to escalate information and then make decisions as quickly as possible. That's the immediate emergency that we are collectively trying to address. Taking other examples, sorry, Lawrence, there are many, many more. Too many, really. I've got the example in mind of a ship that had a total blackout off the coast of Brazil. We had a little time to analyze things, and the idea was to analyze with the AIS how the ship was behaving based on the currents and winds, if there was a risk with the shoreline. Taking this time, we were able to decide and make a decision. Okay, we'll take a tug or we'll start salvage. And that's an example that I've got in mind for a French ship owner a few years ago. Another one, you might have heard about a collision off Cap Corse in France in 2018. Two ships collided, one rammed into another. Well, Florence took the example of two that stayed in each other, and so we waited, and there was a bit of waves, and the ships moved, and they came loose from one another. So instead of paying around $2 million, we could bring that back to $200,000. But that depended because there was no imminent peril. Although there were pollution issues, we took time to think about it, and collectively we made the right decision. So we can see that there are many examples, too many, of course. How are the P&I clubs involved in the start or coordination for salvage? In this type of situation, the priority is given to the hull and machine insurer. The P&I club is made aware. Usually they act as support, and they are available to everybody. But they focus on the interests on board, so passengers, crew members, and we'll come back to that later, the environmental risk, which has been higher and higher since the end of the 90s, and is taken into account in the types of contracts that we're talking about now. Laurence Billard, for a hull insurer, how are you notified, and how do you manage the case from the beginning? As I said, usually the claim is reported by the broker. If it's a major event, we are warned within the next hour or 2 hours based on the time difference, because we can have boats all around the world. It happens that we know from the media before that, so sometimes it's a lot of panic for insurers. If we hear of a fire on board, we check whether it's one of our boats or not. But it's like crisis management, really. We'll get our engineers to work on that. Maybe we'll put claims experts from our other offices to work on that. I know that I've provided support to our German and UK offices for large-scale events because we've all got different expertise. We're all complementary, really. We'll all bring something different to help us find solutions with the policyholder, for the policyholder, and we'll really make sure that it happens as quickly as possible. Wilco, you're in salvage, in the salvage business. Do you prefer to work with an LOF or a commercial contract, and why?
Well, the correct answer is it depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on the values involved. It depends on many factors. I think if it's a very serious incident, we definitely would like an LOF, and I think we push hard for an LOF because you don't want any delays in getting a contract in place. You want to respond very quickly. But indeed, if there's time and it's not a very serious incident and it's obvious that there's time to negotiate, a BIMCO daily rec hire is a perfect contract. So yes, on the major cases or the big urgency cases, we definitely push for an LOF. We want to start cracking as soon as possible. That's.
LOF, is that on the decline, and if so, why?
Yes, well, I think if you look back 25 years, there were about 150 to 200 LOFs a year. I looked up what we were last year. We were at 15. This year we're already at 11. So I like to think we reached a sort of status quo where we are about 20, 30 LOFs a year. It's never been a stable number, you know. Casualties don't happen when you want them to happen. They always happen on a Friday afternoon, on a Saturday morning. And the number of casualties also fluctuates significantly over the years. That's why the LOF is also important, because they cover you, the remuneration covers you also for the years that there are not many contracts. So, because you have to maintain the warehouses, you have to train your divers, it's a very expensive business to operate. It's a really weird business model.
Everybody should have in mind the Ever Given case in mind. Could you tell us where that is? The event took place in March 2021. What's the current status of that case now?
She refloated. No, I think from a contractual perspective, we got in a sort of fight with the owners. When the incident happened, we immediately responded, sent out a team, and offered a Lloyd's open forum, because in our mind it was obviously an Lloyd's open forum, which they declined. Fine, so we gave them a daily hire proposal. And while we were negotiating, while they're sitting on a proposal, we were doing our salvage services to refloat the Ever Given. What happened was that we didn't get a reply to our proposal, and just the day before we refloated the vessel, together with the SCA, I have to say, the Suez Canal authorities, they came back with a counter proposal which was completely different than we had discussed earlier. Then the vessel refloated, and then we actually told them, sorry, there's no contract in place. The reason why we did that is because if there's no contract in place, you can claim common law salvage, which means that you can actually sort of claim on the basis as you would claim under a Lloyd's open forum, under an LOF. So by delaying matters significantly and not getting a contract in place, while we are doing our best to salve a vessel, they shot in their own foot by not agreeing a contract, but by breaking it open, or by signing an LOF initially. So we went to court because the owners said that we actually had a contract in place, which we obviously said that we didn't, and it turned out that the High Court and the Court of Appeal told us we were right and there was no contract in place. So we are now actually preparing for negotiation slash litigation on the Article 13 remuneration, which is substantially higher than it would have been under a daily rec hire.
Et qu'est-ce que cette affaire a
And what did this case cause afterwards, ex post facto?
You see a lot of ship owners getting more, and the insurers more worried about the contracting, the wording slightly, everything is subject to contract. But I think there is more awareness now in the industry regarding the delay of contracting. I mean, if you decide to not go for an LOF, that's perfectly fine. But then make sure that there's a rec hire or a daily hire in place or an alternative contract in place quickly, and don't sit on it for a week while we are doing our services, or the condition, we can't do our service and the condition of the vessel deteriorates very quickly and you get a much bigger problem. So I think the awareness of the delay in contracting is definitely more there since the Ever Given, yeah.
Merci pour cette...
Well, thank you for this very concrete example. Stephanie Schweitzer, if there is a dispute on the compensation of the salvager, how do you arrive at the solution? Well, if there's a dispute, so if the parties have not agreed on compensation, it's pretty technical. And as I was saying, you have the base, that is the value of the goods salvaged, and then there's a percentage which will determine the compensation. Now that percentage depends on a number of criteria, so it's not easy to work out, and that's why you might end up in arbitration, even if there are agreements in the end. But it depends on what kind of arbitration form you've got. In London, you could have compensations that could be as high as 50% of the value salvaged, and then there can be compensation which is more like 3% of the value. So you're talking about very different orders of magnitude here. Of course, it varies from one incident to another, but or from one forum, or indeed from one arbitrator to another, but it may explain some of the differences and some of the disputes. And so applicable law or the competent authority, what decides on that? Who's the competent? Well, that's in the contract. Initially there's a contract, that's the great advantage of the contract. Otherwise, you have to know what rule applies. And we do have the convention that can determine the material rules, but the contract determines the court to which you can go, and that saves a lot of legal fees, because if you do not know where to turn, there'll be a dispute as to what court you will go to. So at least agree on that, regardless of the jurisdiction. Decide on where you will go. Do you have examples of where this was not included in a contract? Well, I have lots of interesting stories, but what happens is there usually is a battle as who will be the fastest to go to the that court that will be more favorable to them, and we find competence criteria, and yes, of course, there are many examples where, for instance, you could have a limited application of the law, and so you can have a limitation fund that will give authority to this or that body. We don't recommend this. We should avoid that kind of dispute as to where, because you should be able to address the substance of the matter as quickly as possible. Alexander, on the issue of scope in the insurance contracts, can you tell us what that covers? Well, you have to explain that, as Stephanie just said, there is uncertainty as to indemnification that is within LOF. The special compensation of Pinnacle provides assurance to the salvagers to know that the environmental risk is at least covered. That was taken on board at the end of the 1990s. There are 30% of LOFs where Scopic is actually included. There's box 7, as Stephanie was saying. You have boxes in box 7. If it's checked, it means that there is a possibility for the salvager to resort to a Scopic, the special compensation P&I clause. And so that tells that the ship owner is prepared to trigger the Scopic, and that happens in 20-30% of the cases. So the Scopic, the purpose is to protect, well, to ensure that there will be compensation for the salvager to protect, to cover the environmental risk. Why is there such a thing? Because the insured value on which the indemnification is calculated is too low compared to the costs incurred by the salvager to save the ship. And so having that compensation will guarantee a minimum compensation. So the compensation, the Scopic compensation, comes under Appendix A of the Scopic clause, saying that for this or that operation, it will cost you so much. It's a schedule. And on that amount, 25% of additional charges are applied, and that gives you the Scopic compensation. But what happens is, so you have the salvaging operation, you have compensation under Article 13 of the LOF, and that is deducted from Scopic, and you get the final number. I'll give you a simple example. Let's imagine Article 13, say, provide, after calculation, say you have $2 million, for instance, all right. And then you see that in Scopic, you have Appendix A, you did complication, 25%, you end up with 2.5 million. So 2 million will be taken by the insurers and the 500 by the ship owners under Scopic. The ship owner then is compensated by the P&I clause. And so what happens? And then the BNI club can come in to the tune of $3 million. And how does this work? Well, the PNI club guarantee up to $3 million comes in. Scopic basically gives visibility to the salvager as to indemnification. So, and that is his incentive to go ahead and salvage the ship regardless of the actual value. But what happens if the that clause, that Scopic clause, isn't involved? Doesn't well, then if you haven't got Scopic, you just have Article 13. Stephanie Schweitzer, how do ship owners wish to see things evolve? I mean, what sort of things do they wish for? I don't know. I think, I mean, of course, ship owners would rather not have the issue at all. But the important thing for ship owners is to, when there is communication between the various players and everybody knows what they're supposed to do. I mean, you see a good example of this with the speakers here. Things go well because usually when there's good communication, you have the right contract, and you can come to an agreement. Usually you arrive at a solution, and as friends here are saying, you need to have immediate communication between the various players, and that is to the benefit, of course, of the ship owner. Now, having said that, the LOF, to return to that, and because sometimes you wonder, what I find unfortunate is that we don't have many disputes on salvaging. There are disputes that go to court, to British courts, but the issue is not so much to see what's wrong in England, but rather what's wrong in France. Why is it that, in fact, you have a few disputes? Why is there, in fact, such a difference in the compensation in France compared to Britain? Maybe these compensations could be revisited, and then that would give more choice to the French forum and to apply French law. But what could move things that way then? Because you need what, harmonization? Or, well, it could be case law. It could, there's technical aspects, and then I mean, if there were more disputes that came through the maritime arbitration chamber, I mean, it's better to go to arbitration than to court. But I don't know. I mean, even arbitrators could consider this. We have very competent arbitrators that could deal with these claims, and that, I mean, at the chamber level, I mean, I would be delighted if the arbitrators would look at this. Of course, I have colleagues in London who are delighted with the present state of affairs, but it would be worth going down that road. Okay, we have a few moments maybe in the audience, because this time we'll have questions from the audience. If there are people who have questions about this, we'll have a roaming microphone, and you just raise your hand and you can put a question to anyone. Yes, sir. I know who this is. Not a surprise. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sébastien Nogiter. I'm a lawyer in Paris who work for the Villeneuve law firm. I think what is needed is political will. In France, when off the French coast we have a ship in peril, the authorities can give an order to go and salvage that ship. The French administration will tell the tugging company, Les Abeilles, to go and salvage that ship. And Les Abeilles, what will they do? They negotiate a contract and they will insist on an LOF that is a British contract, whereas this is a French government agency on a ship incurring difficulties in French territorial waters, salvaging conducted by a ship that belongs to a French authority or French operator. So maybe there should be other solutions than the British courts. So it's a comment rather than a question, but maybe one of you four may wish to respond to this. Wilco, what would you...
Est-ce que quelqu'un d'autre?
Well, anybody else on the downstairs or upstairs? It was that clear to everyone? Well, in that case, thank you so much. No, there's some gentleman there. Ah, yes, on the balcony up there. No? Oh. Ah, yes, there we go. Yes, sorry, hadn't seen you. Yes, go ahead, please. I'm from DOC AC. I had a question. I understand that the compensation of the salvager was of interest for insurers for hull and machine, but I thought Scopic was helping P&I clubs to draw a direct advantage because the benefit was limiting pollution, but they were not involved. And Scopic was a first step, but it probably was inadequate. Had there been recent developments, and are P&I clubs better involved in this issue of compensation the salvager? Alexandre Rocher, that's a question for you, no? Look, I gave you an example with 2 million, 2.5 million, but to arrive at 2 million and to have compensation almost nil, and the P&I club will go up to 2 million. There's no been recent development. I mean, this is a thing that is constantly being discussed because these are recent issues. I mean, they date back to the late 1990s. And Scopic is the third version of a compensation that is different from Article 13. So there are talks. They are sort of long-term talks. But, of course, there's room for improvement. And I'm sure there will be new versions of Scopic with new cases. But as things stand today, I don't see much. But P&Is are rather involved from the start because if the ship is unfortunately in a situation of total loss, then the hull insurers there is total loss, and the cost to retrieve the ship, and that will be for the P&I club. So for them, it's rather good to save the ship, and they will be involved from the start, so that they don't have to carry all the costs related to the wreck. Well, thank you for this answer. Are there any? Yes, this gentleman in the front row. On the second row, sorry.
Petra from United Loss Adjusters. A question to Mr. Wilco. See, with the new marine fuels we have in the industry, I think especially you see a lot of big fires with the batteries. How are companies like Smith preparing for these bigger and more specialized fires to combat? Is it purely more resources? Because I think, let's say, like batteries are very hard to extinguish, and you need specialist mediums. I'm just interested to know, how are you guys preparing to face these new bigger risks?
Yeah, a good question. It's a bit double. So we learn on the job, obviously. Actually dealing with these cases gives you a lot of experience on how to deal, or especially not to deal with it. But we're doing also a lot of research internally. There are also a lot of parties in Holland and in the UK. They're doing especially a lot of research in the lithium-ion batteries. So there's a lot of research done on solutions dealing with these cases, but they're, as mentioned, so complicated, so difficult that there is no one quick solution. It needs a lot more research and maybe thinking about how to construct these vessels or how to place cars on board, for example. And the same goes for alternative fuels. There's a lot of research ongoing. Luckily, we didn't have any major incidents with alternative fuels yet, but there's a lot of research going on. Luckily, we haven't had on that side a lot of practical experience, but lithium-ion batteries, definitely. There's no solution, unfortunately, to that yet.
Donc, pas de solution pour le moment.
So no solutions for now on ion lithium batteries, but many thanks for these very clear examples. We can see that maritime salvaging is a complex, fast-moving business where legal as well as technical expertise is of the essence. We'd like to thank the audience that has been monitoring these debates so carefully. We have a 30-minute break and we'll be back at 4:30.